Senator Tammy Duckworth walked into that hearing room ready for battle, and within minutes the entire chamber knew it. She wasn't there to make polite suggestions or exchange rehearsed talking points. She was there to dismantle Secretary Hegseth's record piece by piece in front of the country. Billions wasted, lives put at risk, and a military more divided than ever. Duckworth laid it all out with a clarity and force that should make every taxpayer sit up straight. Her first strike hit where Americans feel it most, their wallets. Duckworth reminded the secretary of a staggering fact. He had overseen a billion-dollar mission against the Houthis, a group that doesn't even have a navy. The result? Failure. U.S. commercial ships weren't safer, the Red Sea wasn't secured. And instead of protecting American interests, the mission left behind a smoking crater of losses.
It's because you are just an unqualified yes man who can't tell the president how to keep Americans safe. You are focusing on renaming bases for Confederate generals. You said just now to Senator King that to a man and to a woman, we would rather be associated with the old Confederate names. Well, I am one of those women. I served at Fort Rucker, Alabama, a base that was named for a traitor who took arms against the United States of America, led troops who killed Americans. It was renamed for Mike Novosel, a Medal of Honor recipient, who in his citation for the Medal of Honor includes that he saved 29 American lives, to include hovering backwards in a helicopter towards an enemy bunker where a wounded American was laying and saved that person, including after being taken fire himself. I know a little something about what it takes to fly a helicopter when you've been hit by enemy fire. That was heroic. I'd rather be associated with Mike Novosel than a failed Confederate traitor. I don't know whether you are inexperienced or too incompetent, but I wonder when you will actually focus on our nation's warfighting mission. We know that California is just a deliberate, systematic, political, and dangerous campaign led by you. We should not be using our military to play cops against Americans. General Kane, as chairman, a key part of your job is to coordinate military planning across the joint force. Is the department currently incorporating into any military plans expanding the use of the reserve forces to include the National Guard or active duty troops to support domestic law enforcement, including in other locations in the United States?
Senator, you know, we careful.
No, General.
Well, it's not really a yes or no question, Madam Senator. We plan all kinds of different things.
I think it is a yes or no question.
I'm not aware of anything, but the reason why I'm answering is the tags may be looking at something that I'm not aware of.
What are you doing at your level? You're not aware of that happening at your level? Because we know that on his first day, President Trump directed U.S. Northern Command to revise its unified command plan to add new planning requirements to combat, and I quote, criminal activities. A series of follow-up executive orders continue to redirect DOD priorities to supporting domestic law enforcement, including one in April that tells DOD, and I quote, use national security assets for law and order. In other words, do law enforcement's job. I'd like to enter these executive orders into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Secretary Hegseth, you say you are focused on warfighting and warriors. These are your words. Yet you are diverting untold DOD resources and attention to a fundamentally non-military mission of domestic policing. Across the country, we have qualified police officers who are trained for that mission. They know those streets better than the Marines you deploy to Los Angeles, who normally focus on the Indo-Pacific. And you recently approved 700 more troops in 3 other states to do admin and logistics works for ICE. You say all of this is valuable training, but I would much rather have our troops do tough, realistic training relevant to high-end combat. Instead of typing in spreadsheets for ICE, they should be conducting live fire maneuver exercises. Instead of patrolling American neighborhoods and standing in front of federal buildings, they should be rehearsing call for fire missions. We have local police who can stand in front of those federal buildings. And the list of distractions goes on. You are encouraging the DOD workforce to go work for DHS in increasing numbers. You're pulling the military away from facing foreign enemies who literally say things like death to America.
2 F-18 Hornets gone, each carrying a price tag of $200 million. 7 Reaper drones worth another $200 million, also gone. $500 million burned in just a handful of blunders. Duckworth didn't let him hide behind excuses. She compared it to young cadets blowing through money after their first Liberty Pass, except this time, it wasn't beer or bad tattoos being paid for. It was the lives and safety of American service members. You're blowing through money like my fellow cadets, and I did in our first Liberty after basic camp, she mocked. The difference was clear, her mistakes were harmless. His were catastrophic, but money wasn't the only thing lost under Hegseth's watch. Duckworth moved to something even more dangerous, something that cut right to the heart of trust and security. She reminded the chamber that Secretary Hegseth had once sent classified operational details over the Signal app just to brag in front of his wife who held no clearance, his wife who never should have seen a single line of that information. Duckworth made it personal, describing the risk as if it were a commander casually leaving battle plans on a diner table for strangers to read. It was reckless. It endangered service members. And it revealed an arrogance that couldn't be brushed off as a simple mistake. This wasn't just careless, it was a betrayal of the responsibility that comes with the job. And Duckworth wasn't done exposing just how deep the rot went. She described a command environment so hostile that senior leaders refused to serve under Hegseth, chiefs of staff walked away, qualified professionals didn't want to work with him. The Department of Defense was supposed to be built on teamwork, trust, and accountability. Instead, under his leadership, it had become toxic. And then came the most damning accusation, the misuse of the U.S. military inside American cities. Duckworth called it what it was, unjustified, un-American, and dangerous. Troops weren't being trained for high-end combat. They weren't being prepared for real threats abroad. Instead, they were being pulled into domestic policing, patrolling American streets, standing guard at buildings, and even working in administrative roles for immigration enforcement. For Duckworth, a combat veteran herself, the absurdity was unbearable. She wanted the military focused on its mission, protecting the nation from foreign threats. Instead, Hegseth was turning it into a political tool for show. But her sharpest blow was still coming. Duckworth zeroed in on one of Hegseth's loudest culture war battles, his defense of keeping U.S. bases named after Confederate generals. He had argued that it was tradition, he had insisted that renaming was unnecessary. But Duckworth, who had served at Fort Rucker, Alabama, knew better. She reminded him, and the country, that Fort Rucker had once honored a traitor who fought against the United States, a man who led troops to kill Americans. Then she delivered the contrast. That same base had since been renamed after Mike Novosel, a Medal of Honor recipient who flew helicopters under enemy fire to save 29 American lives. Duckworth herself, a helicopter pilot who had been shot down in combat, described what it meant to hover backward toward enemy fire to rescue a wounded soldier. She didn't just tell a story, she embodied it. Her voice cut through the room with the authority of someone who knew exactly what sacrifice meant. I'd rather be associated with Mike Novosel than with a failed Confederate traitor, she declared. The message was undeniable. Hegseth could play political games with nostalgia, but real leadership meant honoring true American heroes. And then Duckworth raised the question that shook the hearing to its core. She turned her attention to General Kane, demanding answers about whether the Department of Defense was planning to use reserve forces, National Guard units, or even active duty troops for domestic policing. It was a yes or no question, and Kane struggled to answer. But Duckworth knew exactly why she was asking. Because in recent years executive orders had quietly directed the Pentagon to shift resources toward domestic law enforcement. Soldiers trained for combat abroad were suddenly patrolling American streets, blurring the line between military defense and civilian policing. For Duckworth, this wasn't theoretical. It was dangerous. The sight of armored vehicles and armed troops on city streets might look like strength, but it eroded trust. It escalated tensions, and it undermined the very freedoms that service members were supposed to be defending overseas. This wasn't just about policy, it was about the soul of American democracy. Duckworth drilled deeper into the issue. She cited executive orders that instructed the Department of Defense to use national security assets for law and order. On paper, it might sound harmless, but in practice, it meant stripping combat readiness to chase political optics. She laid out the consequences. Marines who should have been training in the Indo-Pacific were instead patrolling Los Angeles. Troops who should have been conducting live-fire exercises were stuck typing spreadsheets for immigration agencies. Soldiers weren't preparing for real enemies, they were being used as stage props in a domestic show of force. The cost wasn't just wasted hours, it was readiness. It was the ability of the U.S. military to face foreign adversaries. And Duckworth's point was brutal: these decisions didn't just weaken America's defense, they militarized civilian life. And beneath all of this, she said, lay one undeniable truth. Duckworth pointed to the deeper cracks that had spread under Hegseth's leadership. Recruitment had collapsed, retention was plummeting, morale was at historic lows, and it wasn't just bad luck, it was the result of mismanagement at the very top. She reminded everyone that the Department of Defense workforce isn't just numbers on a chart, it's people. People who need clear missions, competent leadership, and a sense that their sacrifices matter. Instead, under Hegseth, they got chaos, they got culture wars, they got distractions that pulled them away from what truly mattered: defending the country. Duckworth didn't hold back. She told him directly, if he wanted to be the Secretary of Homeland Security, he could apply for that job. But as Secretary of Defense, his job was to fight and win wars, not to play politics. And in that role he had failed. By the end of the hearing, Duckworth had done more than question a cabinet secretary. She had issued a warning to the nation: billions wasted on failed missions, classified secrets handled recklessly, a toxic command climate that drove away talent, troops misused as domestic police, culture wars fought at the expense of real heroes, and a military workforce left broken. Her message was simple but devastating: leadership isn't about slogans. It isn't about defending Confederate names or playing political games. It's about integrity, sacrifice, and protecting the people who put their lives on the line. And on every one of those counts, Duckworth made it clear, Secretary Hegseth had failed. So what do you think? Should leaders who waste resources, betray trust, and weaken national defense be held accountable? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to see more of these confrontations that expose the truth behind closed doors, make sure to hit subscribe. The next one is even more controversial.